Europe's military landscape is evolving before our eyes. Across the continent, numerous countries are increasing their defense spending, investing in innovative new equipment, and preparing themselves for the prospect of war. They've seen Russia's ruthless aggression in Ukraine, and they want to be ready to respond should Vladimir Putin decide to strike elsewhere. As one of the closest NATO nations to the ongoing conflict, Poland has been one of the most proactive in its preparations, assembling what some experts are calling the most powerful tank army in Europe, and bringing Putin's worst nightmares to life right on Russia's doorstep. The military experts at Army Recognition recently carried out an in-depth assessment of European tank fleets. They took a look at the number of tanks each nation currently has, plus any upcoming orders that are set to arrive in the next few years, as well as the most popular types of tanks in use across the continent today, and which fleets stand the best chance of withstanding a prospective Russian invasion. Their research uncovered some fascinating trends and quite conclusively proved that Poland is not playing around when it comes to modernizing its military and defending its borders. So let's take a closer look at the data. Historically, one of the simplest ways to compare the tank fleet strength of two or more nations is to look purely at how big their fleets are. More tanks doesn't always mean more strength, but it certainly helps to have a few hundred tanks to call on as opposed to just a few dozen. And in terms of pure numbers, Poland doesn't quite top the charts, but certainly comes close. According to Army Recognition's data, it's Turkey that leads the way with an estimated 2,381 tanks in total. Greece takes second place in the rankings with an impressive 1,385 tanks. For the sake of comparison, it's worth noting that the US is estimated to currently operate around 2,640 tanks, while China leads the global rankings with around 4,700. And Russia has an estimated 3,460 operational tanks at this time, with around 2,100 additional older tanks still in storage facilities, most of which date back to the days of the Soviet Union. The last data puts Poland in third place in Europe, with just under 900 tanks. However, Poland already has additional acquisition efforts underway that should see it reach a total fleet size of between 1,800 and 1,900. That would see Warsaw's army overtake Greece and sit far ahead of almost every other nation in Europe. Germany, for example, which is also in the process of making major upgrades to its military after decades of stagnation, has a mere 313 tanks in total. And it's a similar story across the other big Western European nations. France has a fleet of around 200 tanks, for instance, while the United Kingdom sits slightly ahead with 213, and Spain has around 274. These fleets may seem almost embarrassingly small when compared to the thousands of tanks fielded by the likes of China, Russia, and the United States. However, as Army Recognition's experts note, it's not just about quantity when it comes to modern-day tank fleets, but quality. A country like Russia, for example, certainly seems to have an almost insurmountably large tank force if you only pay attention to the numbers. But when you actually dig into the details and look at what types of tanks it uses, many of them are old and antiquated by today's standards, lacking the key features and modern technologies that separate the world's finest tanks from the rest. The report points out, for example, that a large percentage of Russia's fleet is now made of legacy models, like the Soviet-era T-55s, T-62s, older T-72 variants, and T-80s, alongside newer models like the T-90. Some of those tanks date back several decades. The T-55, for example, was introduced shortly after World War II and has almost zero relevance on the battlefields of today. Similar things can be said of the T-62 and certain other Russian main battle tanks, MBTs. In terms of fire control features, survivability, digital integration, and other metrics that truly matter, these types of tanks are literally light years behind the best models from Europe, Asia, and North America. So, even though Moscow may still be able to generate mass, that doesn't necessarily mean as much as it once did. Because having a truly strong tank force today isn't just about having a 4 or 5 figure fleet. It's about having a fleet with state-of-the-art capacities. It's about having tanks that can actually cope in the modern battle space, with the highest standards of survivability, combat readiness, and digital integration, so that they can gather and share data with other systems and units, informing strategies, and providing that all-important tactical edge in the heat of battle. Europe's military leaders evidently understand that. Therefore, while many of their fleets might seem small on paper, they're far stronger than they first appear. Germany's fleet of 313 tanks, for example, is made up exclusively of Leopard 2s. Numerous experts from around the world place the Leopard 2 as one, if not the best tank in existence today, due in large part to its almost impeccable design, which provides the ideal balance of firepower, mobility, and crew protection. There are very few tanks on Earth that can come even close to matching the Leopard 2, with its 1500 horsepower diesel engine allowing it to reach peak speeds of 70 km per hour or 43 miles per hour. Furthermore, its advanced optics, combined with its 120mm smoothbore cannon, allow it to accurately strike targets up to 5 km, 3.1 miles away, even while in motion. This tank also enjoys the advantages of modular, multi-layer armor that's constantly being refined and improved, along with high-end fire control, thermal imaging, and digital battlefield management technology. France, similarly, has a small but mighty fleet, with 200 of its own Leopard tanks, including 51 units that have been upgraded to the latest and greatest XLR standard. While the Leopard may not top any rankings of the world's best MBTs, it's still a formidable piece of armor for any enemy force to encounter, famed for its exceptional levels of mobility, its high-tech fire control systems, and its rapid-firing autoloader. It's one of the most responsive Western tanks of the 21st century, fitted out with modular armor for easy field repairs, upgrades, and maintenance in real-world combat conditions. Over in the UK, it's a similar situation. The British Army boasts 213 Challenger 2 tanks and is steadily progressing towards the next generation Challenger 3 standard, which brings it with a new and improved main gun, stronger armor, and more advanced center suites, bringing the country's tank fleet in line with many of its contemporaries. All over Europe, the same pattern can be seen, with many countries having small but still strong forces that are well suited to their specific needs. Spain, for example, has 219 Leopard 2E tanks and 55 Leopard 2A4s, forming a balanced and forward-thinking armoured force. Italy has 150 of its own C1 Ariete tanks, but is working towards modernising its fleet with more advanced variants, while the Netherlands, after years of operating without an independent fleet and integrating into a joint German-Dutch Leopard 2 unit established in 2015, is now moving to re-establish its own armoured capability by purchasing 46 new Leopard 2A8 tanks. Sweden, meanwhile, has 110 STRV-122 tanks, which are generally regarded as being among the best Leopard 2 variants in operational service today. Despite its historically neutral status, Switzerland also has invested heavily in Leopard 2s, with 134 units that have been specially adapted to its own national standards. Up in the Nordic nations, Finland has 200 more Leopard 2 tanks, with some 2A4 and some 2A6 variants, while Denmark and Norway have smaller forces of 44 Leopard 2A7Vs and 36 Leopard 2A4s respectively. Portugal has a fleet of 34 Leopard 2A6 tanks, while Austria has 53 Leopard 2A4 models, and in Central Europe there's Hungary with 110 Leopard 2 variants and Soviet T-72s, Czechia with 58 Leopard 2A4s and upgraded T-72s, and Slovakia with a small but balanced fleet, once more made up of Leopard 2A4s and Russian T-72s. The further east we go, the more T-72s and other Soviet-era tanks we start to see. Romania, for example, has a sizable fleet of 377 tanks, but it's largely comprised of quite old variants like the T-55AM, TR-85 and TR-85M1. In Serbia too, there are 229 tanks, including 195 M84s, 30 T-72s and a small batch of M84 AS1s. While some of these fleets are notably smaller or weaker than others, many reflect the needs and military ambitions of their respective nations reasonably well. The UK, for example, an island nation, doesn't necessarily need thousands of tanks sitting around on the ground, but still has a good number of high-end models that are ready to go should the need arise. Poland's needs, however, are very different. Situated right beside Ukraine, it has to be ready to deal with the same sort of invasion that Kyiv went through back in 2022. It needs to have a ground force strong enough to deal with hundreds of Russian tanks and armoured vehicles, plus tens of thousands of troops rampaging across its borders. And for that sort of situation, a small fleet of just a couple of hundred tanks simply will not suffice. Fortunately, Poland is making all the right moves to ready itself for the worst-case scenario. But before we go deeper into that, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Now, Poland isn't banking on either quality or quantity in its tank fleet, it's banking on both. It wants a fleet that's not only made up of the latest state-of-the-art models, but also wants to ensure that its force is large enough to strike fear into the hearts of its enemies. It wants a force that actually stands a chance of going toe-to-toe with those thousands of Russian tanks still in service, and the thousands more hidden away in Soviet storage facilities. And it's already well on the way towards bringing that vision to life. Right now, Poland's tank fleet is already one of the best on the continent. It includes not one, not two, but three of the best tanks on the planet. The K2 Black Panther from South Korea, the M1A2 Abrams from the United States, and the Leopard 2 from Germany. Altogether, Warsaw can call on 180 K2 Black Panthers, 117 M1A2 Abrams, plus another 116 of the slightly older but still excellent M1A1 Abrams model, and 202 Leopard 2s, with 105 of the 2A5 variant and 97 of the 2PL variant. Poland also has 205 PT-91 tanks, plus a small but still notable selection of 46 T-72s. That's not a bad force by any means, but Poland is aiming much higher. It's in the process of acquiring an additional 1,000 K2 and K2PL tanks in a multi-billion-dollar deal. For reference, the K2 is generally regarded as the most advanced tank in existence. It excels in almost every metric that matters. In mobility, for example, the K2 sets a benchmark that many other tanks have no hope of matching, making use of its in-arm suspension unit, ISU, that allows it to traverse uneven terrain with ease, perfect for the hilly landscapes of the Korean Peninsula and other similar regions around the world. When it comes to firepower too, the K2 reigns supreme, with its 120mm L55 smoothbore gun paired with an automatic loader that allows it to fire up to 15 rounds a minute, even while on the move. And with its world-leading radar systems and sensors, the K2 doesn't just pack a punch, it's also extremely accurate, striking its target almost every time. The tank is also capable of firing South Korea's Smart Top Attack Munitions, or KSTAM-2s, which can fly in high trajectories, like artillery shells, to strike the often thinner and weaker top sections of enemy tanks and armoured vehicles from above. Thanks to that, it doesn't matter what sort of MBT the K2 encounters, it will almost always have the advantage in any sort of one-on-one battle. The K2's technology is next level too. Indeed, it's often described as a rolling supercomputer, boasting some of the most advanced battlefield management technologies ever invented, allowing for seamless integration and data sharing capabilities with surrounding units like drones, aircraft, and ground teams. Of course, all that tech and firepower wouldn't matter too much if the K2 couldn't take a hit. Fortunately, it's also one of the toughest tanks around, using composite armor, explosive reactive armor, and a soft-kill active protection system to cope with direct hits, small arms fire, and even counteract incoming missiles too. On top of all of this, the K2 is lighter and more agile than its closest competitors, the Leopard 2 and M1 Abrams. So it's not just strong, sturdy, and technologically superior, but surprisingly speedy too. And when Poland's plans come to fruition, it will most likely have more of these tanks than any other country, with a total fleet size of just under 2,000 tanks. What's more, the earliest batches have already arrived, giving Poland's tank crews the time and opportunity they need to start learning the K2 systems and mastering its many exciting technologies. The more time passes, the more proficient those crews will become. It's hardly surprising, then, that Army Recognition and other military analyst groups have no hesitation in labelling Poland as the most comprehensive armoured modernisation effort underway in Europe today. No other country comes close. Once Poland completes its expansion, it will overtake Greece in terms of pure tank numbers and close in on Turkey. But more importantly, it will have a force that's much more modern than either of those nations and larger than all the major Western European nations combined. This will be the ultimate fleet, combining mass, industrial backing, and complete alliance interoperability. That last part is perhaps the most important of all, and maybe just the single thing that scares Russia the most. Because, as Army Recognition notes, when we look at the various tank fleets emerging and modernising across Europe, one thing becomes clear: the same models appear again and again. Numerous nations have invested in the Leopard 2, for example, as well as the Abrams, and some have also expressed interest in following Poland's example and buying up some K2s too. Even the Eastern European nations and former Soviet republics that survived for years on their stockpiles of old T-72s and similar models are moving away from those kinds of tanks and opting for Western alternatives. That's huge for Europe as a combined force and for the NATO alliance, because when you have an entire continent using common or closely aligned high-end platforms, it's much easier for them to work together, aid one another, pool their strength, and deploy their forces side by side, without having to worry about compatibility issues or simply getting in each other's way. In the past, when all these countries were operating completely different tanks, it would have been much harder for them to work together in a real combat situation. But what was once a patchwork of aging national fleets, each with its own quirks and characteristics, is swiftly transformed into what Army Recognition describes as a unified, high-technology European armoured force capable of sustained high-intensity operations. The report also highlights how, even though Western European nations historically have the strongest economies and therefore the most money to spend on their militaries, the balance of power across Europe is actually moving eastward, towards the countries closest to Russia, the same nations that Putin and his Kremlin cronies will see as their most direct threats and potential targets for future invasions or special military operations. Poland is chief among them. There have been rumours and whispers for years about Putin's potential plans to push on through Ukraine or leverage his control in Belarus to launch an attack on Poland, cutting off the Baltic states, forging a pathway from mainland Russia through to the Kaliningrad exclave, and testing NATO's mettle at last. Poland understands that. It knows that if Russia does intend to pursue further military action beyond Ukraine, then Warsaw will be in its firing line. That's exactly why it's taking all necessary measures to strengthen its forces, replacing legacy systems, expanding its fleet size, and investing in the best tanks that money can buy. And Poland isn't just focused on tanks. It's also massively boosted its defence budget to almost 5%, leading the whole of Europe in this regard, while also expanding its troop numbers, training civilians in defence and medical skills, strengthening its cyber security strategies, and building an extraordinary system of fortifications along its eastern border, the so-called Eastern Shield, which includes new bunkers, anti-tank barriers, and anti-drone systems to cope with anything that Russia could feasibly throw its way. While many other European nations are also doing sterling work in modernising and improving their militaries, it's Poland that's setting the best example of the lot. Bit by bit, it's becoming the eastern flank powerhouse it needs to be, the deterrent standing between Vladimir Putin and whatever future campaigns of conquest he has in mind, the brick wall between the Kremlin's war machine and the NATO alliance. And it's only going to get stronger from here. Now, you can learn more about how a hypothetical war between Russia and Poland could play out in this video, which explores how the two forces compare to one another and what the broader response might be if Russia dared to march on Warsaw. Alternatively, for an up-to-date look at the situation in Ukraine, check out this video, which looks at how Kyiv's strategic drone strikes have lit the spark that could see Russia's economy explode at last. And finally, for more insightful analysis and fact-based military reporting like this, be sure to subscribe to The Military Show today.